Chapter 1 Amron. He dreamt of a table set high above the world. Cloud cloaked it in a vibrant golden light, raining down upon the fallen men of Varen's order. Cups and chalices and mugs uncountable filled the cedar wood surface, brimming with ale and mead and whiskey and wine, quaffed and refilled as the stories were sung. 100 voices echoed out in account, some epic, some tragic, some humorous, regaling the men around them of their triumphs and toils, their victories and vices, to cheers and laughs and sombre silence as appropriate for the tale being told. The table was long, endlessly long, bleeding away to the edge of sight and sound. Into the far distance it unrolled, as straight and true as the immutable movement of time, the men sitting shoulder to shoulder to either side, drinking and feasting and singing in this, the greatest of the eternal halls. The noise was cacophonous, joyful and all-consuming, a din of impenetrable merriment and mirth. Men came and went as they pleased, fading through the clouds that cloaked the hall to visit with their friends and loved ones. There were many chambers among the eternal halls, many rooms and gardens and terraces, some open to all, others restricted to but a few. The knights of Varen could walk freely, the Steel Father himself had decreed. His table was not to be a prison sentence, he had said, to shackle his knights forever to the seat they had been assigned. Let them stand and leave and wander, he had proclaimed. Let them visit their loved ones at their need, and return whenever they so wish. Yet always to the same seat when they did, a seat determined by the sum of a man's attainments when walking the ephemeral plane. There were few faces Amron knew, faces of old friends, lost but never forgotten. First blades and kings, warriors and champions, famous faces he'd seen depicted in ink and dye and wood and stone, carved and drawn and painted. At the head sat Varen himself, thunderous of voice, impossibly grand of stature, with a great blue mantle swaying at his back, silver armor of pristine brilliance shining out with a light of its own. The very greatest of his bloodline sat about him. His eldest son Ellen, powerful and proud, his youngest son Aaron, temperate and wise. Amron saw in his dream his namesake, Amron the Bold, son of Aaron, grandson of Varen, who had renewed war after an age of peace, seeking vengeance for his grandfather's fall. He saw King Gideon the Great, who had won the War of Wrath 2,000 years ago, and Balion the Brute, one of the greatest warriors the North had ever known, scourge of dragons, master of winds and mist. His own father had been named for Gideon, his grandfather for Balion. Both sat among the privileged few, with other great first blades of the past. Rufus Tanar and Oswald Manfrey, and more, so many more. Amron stood aside, observing and ignored, the only man living amongst a great hall of the dead. The man grows to fit the name, he thought, recalling what his father had told him once. Now here his father was, sitting with Gideon the Great, and his grandfather too with Balion the Brute. Great names, the making of great men. He looked from one man to the next, then found that King Amron the Bold was looking right at him, and he alone among the host. The man grows to fit the name, he said, in a thick and heavy voice. Have you earned mine, Amron Dekar, you who let my city fall? Amron had no answer. He found his eyes moving away. A drum beat sounded, sudden as thunder, a single thud crashing through the hall. Amron turned his eyes back to the head to find Varen himself rising to his feet, towering above them all. He held an arm aloft and called, "Brothers, sons, my children, my family, my friends." Another joins us, another ascends to his seat. He gestured to the side of the hall, where the cloak of clouds began to part to make a doorway. The silhouette of a man took form, approaching. "We welcome to our family another Dekar," King Varen bellowed out, "Vesran, son of Gideon, grandson of Balion, to take his place among us, the only other man to have fended off the dread." The silence was shattered as Vesran stepped forth to join them. 1,000 voices sang out his name, and fists beat down loudly upon the table, clattering countless cups and plates and jugs. "Vesran Dekar," they roared. "Dekar, Dekar, he who stood against the dread." Varen was smiling and waving him over, and near the head of the table a seat was being drawn back. Amron recognized the figure of Vesrin the Valiant, an ancient first blade and champion for whom his brother had been named. I give you my appellation, Vesrin Descartes, he proclaimed, to a round of raucous cheers. Valiant is the man who stands alone against the dread. Vesrin the Valiant is you now, my brother. Vesrin shook his head humbly. I was not alone, my lords. My brother, my nephew, we all... But his next words were swallowed by noise, as all the men huddled about him, demanding he tell his tale. Amron felt himself being drawn away as though expelled by some unseen force. The clouds thickening, voices dimming. He could faintly hear Vesrin calling out for Alaron. My seat, my seat. I will give my seat to him. He could see Amron the Bold still staring at him, jaw fixed in disapproval. You let my city fall. You've not yet earned my name, Amron Descartes. And last of all, a chant, as his body was dragged away. Descartes, Descartes, the men of the order were crying. Descartes, Descartes, Descartes. Descartes, Lord Descartes, my lord, Amron. He stirred from his sleep, eyes snapping open at once. A hand was shaking at his shoulder, black leather over dark gray steel. Before him stood a shadow in the darkness, half lit by the gentle flicker of fire from a torch. My lord, a messenger has come. He is waiting for you at the river gate. Amron cleared his throat and sat up. He'd only intended to rest his eyes a moment, but after 2 days without sleep. What messenger, Rajan? From where? North, my lord, from up the river. Crosswater? Whitebeard nodded. He has a letter, he says, for your eyes only. The ranger's own eyes looked black in the dark, like a shark's, yet all the same Amron could see the worry in them. It isn't good news, I fear, my lord. There is no good news anymore. Amron stood wearily, lumbering over to a side table to gulp down a cup of water. Pain tore through him with every step, his right thigh burning, his left shoulder jumping and cramping in spasms. He ignored it, harnessed it as he was learning to do, as I have to do. At a touch, the froth blade would cast aside his ails, but he could not rely on it forever. I will give it up, he promised himself, as he had 10,000 times before. He put down his cup and met the eyes of Rajan Strand. How long was I sleeping? He asked. An hour or so, my lord. Amron nodded. It felt shorter, a blink and no more. His head was heavy, his eyes the same, the exhaustion thick in his blood. You need to rest more, Rajan Whitebeard said. If there's another attack... Soon, he promised. The assault on King's Point had happened only 2 days ago, and there had been much and more to deal with since then. In the meantime, tonics brewed by the medics would do to keep him functional. And this, he thought as he hitched the frostblade around his armored waist, the power of Vandar himself lay within the metal. It was plenty to sustain him for now. Lead on. They passed through the broken doorway of the building in which Amron had taken his rest, some part of an old soldier barracks that had been only partly destroyed during the attack. Outside was a world of rubble and ash, of tumbled towers and stone-strewn squares, blackened and scorched. The survivors from the battle had taken up temporary residence in the ruin of the city, raising tents and shelters where they could, living like rats among the wreckage as they crept about, eyes skyward, ever fearing the return of the dread. Amron Descartes shared that fear, though did not let it show. If he wilted under the weight of it all, what hope did his soldiers have? Far too many men have deserted us already. If I crumble, the rest will follow. Ash coated the streets like snow, billowing and stirring with each step of his god-steel sabatons. Amron had not taken off his armor since long before the battle began, nor would he for some time to come, he knew. He felt filthy beneath it, his linens and leathers soaked and stained, his face spotted with gouts of dirt and soot, his hair an unwashed cascade of oily, graying black locks. I feel like the city, he reflected, broken and covered in grime. The way to the river gate was choked with sleeping men, tucked up into whatever nook or cranny they could find, up against half-broken walls and under half-fallen roofs, in doorways and arches that once led into buildings and now led nowhere but to rubble. Many huddled around fires to keep warm, muttering in muted tones or gazing into empty space in a 1,000-yard stare. Shock had gripped great swaths of them, and ailment not all would escape. mental scars that would render them useless should they see wings in the skies again. Others had suffered physical injury, broken limbs and savage cleaves from claw and fang and steel. Many more were burned. Great long lines of men lay down the alleys and lanes and across open stone squares with bandages wrapped about their legs and arms, torsos and necks and faces, moaning in pain as medics moved about, trying to tend to them as best they could. Some stirred at Amron's passing, but few. Those that did tried to smile, or raise a fist in salute, or render words of courtesy for the commander and champion. Amron returned their smiles, passed on words of comfort where he could. To dying men, it was all he could give them, solace and a promise that their trials on this earth were done. The great square inside the river gate had been cleared of much of the rubble. Here the command posts were raised by whatever senior lords and captains remained, to take account of their losses and what men they had left, to list out the names of the dead and deserters, to arrange crews to search for those as yet unaccounted for, of which there were thousands of lying dead beneath the rubble or trapped underground within the subterranean sanctuaries that spread beneath King's Point like a warren. Before the fighting, Amron had ordered Lady Brockenhurst and her courtiers to take refuge in the sanctuary beneath the spear, along with Lord Wharton, her castellan, and Walter Selleck as well. By some stroke of fortune, all of them had survived. Even as the tunnels and chambers collapsed around them, the ceilings crumbling as the spear itself came down, torn apart by the wrath of the dread. It was Walter's doing, Amron knew. "Your luck remains, my friend," he had said to him when greeting him after the battle. The self-styled luckiest man in the world had been insistent that Vandar's light had deserted him. Clearly that was not so. Others were not so fortunate. Many civilians had gone down into their refuges to take cover before the battle, and many soldiers had joined them when they saw the dread approaching. Most still remained dead or trapped. It was hard to know for sure. Even now, the search crews could hear trapping echoing from below, hear the faint, fearful sounds of voices crying out for a savior. Getting to them was another matter, however, with the city so unstable. In truth, most would die down there, entombed forever in the sanctuaries that were meant to save them. I was meant to save them, Amron Descartes thought. Dream or not, his ancient namesake had been right. I have not yet earned the name. The river gate was under the guard of Sir Adam Thorley, commander of the Pointed Watch, the King's Point City Guard. It was a charge as dead as the city itself, as dead as tens of thousands of men. My lord, the young knight said, seeing him approach. He had with him a dozen of his men, wearing war-weary faces, all clad in doom, and the messenger standing with his horse. By the look of that lather about the horse's mouth, he'd been riding hard for hours. Sir Adam, anything new to report? Yes, sire. More stragglers and deserters have returned, mostly Vandarian, but some southerners as well. The former are being taken in by their own commanders. Captain Lithian is handling the latter. There's no better man for it. It was not just their own men who deserted during the battle. Many thousands of southerners had done the same, fleeing into the woods at the sight of the dread, and over the past 2 days, scores had returned, preferring to give themselves over as captives than try to make it on their own in the north, with enemies all about them. Lithian had been given the charge of handling and housing them, such as he could, though it was only a short-term solution. One problem among many, Amron thought. Has this messenger brought me another? He gave Sir Adam a nod, then turned to the man in question. Your name, he said. Sir Hutchin, my lord, a knight of House Bygase, sworn to the Harrows of Crosswater. He glanced uneasily about, then withdrew a scroll from within his leather glove. Lord Harrow had me ride here with his finest horse, with all haste, my lord. We have barely taken rest over the last 2 days. Take it now, your duty is done. Amron turned. Sir Adam, see that Sir Hutchin is taken somewhere quiet to sleep, and make sure his horse is fed and watered. Yes, sire. Amron took the scroll, ripped the seal, and read the words. The color drained at once from his cheeks. It was just as he had feared. My lord, Sir Adam prompted. What does it say? Our worst nightmare. He rolled up the note, slipped it into a pocket in his cloak, and drew a breath. Gather my council, Sir Adam. There is something they need to hear. It did not take long for them to assemble, each man stepping through the flaps of Amron's command pavilion in quick succession as soon as they got the call. Some had been sleeping. Others were on duty elsewhere, attending to their orders. They came all the same, bleary-eyed and battle-worn, with scorch marks on their cloaks and armor and haunted looks in their eyes. Some were nursing minor injuries. Sir Quin Sharp had a broken wrist, Sir Tagon Cargill a deep cleave across his left cheek, while others bore wounds of grief. Rodman Taynar had lost his uncle, Lord Dalton, the first blade dying in his arms on the battlefield from a fatal loss of blood. The Ironfoot, Lord Gavron Grave, had lost his nephew, Sir Marlin. Others had seen dear friends die, those they counted as brothers. Amron had lost his brother by blood, Elion his beloved uncle, yet none compared to the suffering of poor Sir Torres Stoutman, whose sons, Darren, Elmid, and Hawden, had all gone to the eternal halls. The pavilion was empty but for a single oakwood table and blocks of uneven stone to act as seats. There was no carpet, no furnishings, no comforts whatsoever. 2 iron braziers had been brought in to provide light and warmth, yet there was a coldness here that could not be driven away by fire. Few sat. Only Lord Wharton, who shuffled in, coughing, and the Ironfoot took perch. Elsewise, the others remained standing. Amron looked across at them all once. The full compliment? I think it's compliment. Amron looked across at them all once the full complement had come, standing on the far side of the table. Some scrolls scattered it, scribbled plans, the early workings of strategy, flanked by a pair of fat tallow candles burning low. He decided to avoid preamble. Withdrawing the note from his pocket, he said, Varanor came under attack 2 days ago, after the dread flew north. He looked around, saw nothing resembling shock. Desperation and despair, yes, but those were already present. In truth, all had expected this. The defenses were quickly overwhelmed, Lord Harrow writes. We all saw how many dragons Drollgar had with him when he left. That many, with the dread at the fore. Is it destroyed? Elion asked. He stood to one side near the canvas wall, pale face still recovering from the exertions of the battle. Elion had been hit by a blast from the bondstone, the very will of Agarath, striking at his chest mid-flight and knocking him to the earth. Though his godsteel armor had protected him from the brunt of it, it had taken its toll all the same, rendering him incapable of flight ever since. I don't know, Elion, Amron answered, but after what happened here, we must assume the damage is considerable. How did Lord Harrow get word? Asked Sir Quin Sharp, a Varan knight, broad-faced and homely, stout and capable. Is he not in Crosswater? A crow got out of Varanor during the attack, from your uncle, Sir Quin. He scribbled a note telling of the Titan, towers falling, walls tumbling, wings in the sky blotting out the sun, the very fire of hell itself pouring from the lowers. The note was taken to the nearest rookery, and by chance the crow managed to make it to Crosswater. When Lord Harrow received it, he dispatched a rider here at once. He's dead then, Sir Quin said, digesting that for a moment. My uncle. We don't know that. Sir Baumfree Sharp had been put in charge of the defense of the capital, along with Sir Hank Rothwell and Sir Winslow Bryant. All 3 were household knights of middling standing, the best of what was left with so many senior knights and lords away. In all likelihood, all 3 were dead, along with tens of thousands of others, hundreds even. The thought was a knife in his heart, a cold knife twisting. Sir Tagon Cargill gave out a heavy grunt. So your uncle's dead. What of it? We've all lost people, Sharp. He swung a mighty arm towards Sir Torres Stoutman, standing beside him cloaked in sorrow. Torres lost his 3 sons. Sons, Sharp, sons. No one cares about your bloody uncle. This isn't a competition, Sir Tagon, Amron said. We do not battle over grief. I have 2 sons as well, Sir Quin retorted to the giant. Young boys, up in the Iron Moors. They might be dead as well, so far as I know. Speculation will not serve us, Lithien came in. We deal with what we know, Sir Quin. Easy for you to say, you have no children of your own. The Knight of the Vale nodded. A curse, it has always been said, to have no sons and heirs. Perhaps now it is more a blessing. I do not pretend to understand your fear, Sir Quin, but... My fear is enough to drive me home, sir. Return to my wife and sons and... Desert? Boomed the giant of Hammerhall. We've got enough of those cravens already. He snorted and spat out a name. Stone. If I see Sir Ramsay again, I'll pull his scrawny little head off. Don't make me do the same to you, Sharp. Sir Quinn raised his chin. I'm no deserter, Tagon. He looked at Amron. I'm not, my lord. I hope you know that. I do. Amron had a good sense of his men. Or at least he thought he did. Once before he could sniff out a coward a mile off, but in these darkening days those margins were starting to thin. He did not begrudge a man the urge to return home to defend his family. Yet if we all do that, what then? Their only hope was to keep on fighting. If they splintered now, all would be lost. Elyon took a step forward from the side, an urging look in his eye. I have to go, father, he said. Varanar, I should have gone already. You've been bedridden, Elyon. This isn't your fault. There's nothing you could have done. I could have tracked him, Drogar, maybe even drawn him off. He clenched his jaw in self-rebuke, but there was only so much Elyon could do. I'll go now, tonight. We have to know the truth. We know the truth, Lord Gavron Grave rumbled. He heaved to his feet, a heavy-set man of 62, stamping down on his god-steel leg. We all saw what he did to us here, and we all heard Sir Bonfrey's words. Towers falling, walls tumbling, wings blotting out the sun, a hellish inferno that doesn't paint a good enough picture for you, boy. One man's words, one man's eyes. I can look upon Varanar from a different vantage, my lord. Sir Storas Pentar agreed. Varanar is 10 times as large as King's Point, with 10 times as many towers and 10 times as many ballistas. Perhaps only a part of it was destroyed. The rest is rubble, the Ironfoot broke in. Same as here. 10 times the size, 10 times the price. The Dread has always wanted to see Varanar burn. There's no stopping that monster. I disagree. Amron would not allow this sort of thinking to infect his men. The Ironfoot was as staunch as a man could be, famous for having his own leg cut off after he broke it during a hunting accident and replacing it with godsteel. If he could be allowed to wilt like this, then others would be sure to follow. I'll not let this pessimism become a plague, spreading from man to man. The Dread can be defeated, Lord Grave. Never think otherwise, he said. His tone brooked no rejection. I must hammer this message home. As soon as we start thinking we are lost, then we are, and there is no coming back from it. My brother drew blood from the dragon, so did my son, and there were gashes on his face and neck when he arrived. He can be cut, wounded, weakened. Perhaps his assault on Varanar has proven his folly. A few well-placed ballista bolts would have even Drogar reeling. It only takes one, my lord. As a man can die from an arrow to the eye, so the Dread can die from a bolt. Lord Gavron gave a grunt, nodded, and sat again, taking the weight off his godsteel leg. Didn't mean to sound so defeatist, Amron. You're right. Anything living can be killed. I'm just saying it won't be easy. Killing a dragon is never easy, less so a giant one. Elyon gripped the windblade as though trying to muster his strength. We have to know for certain. If I leave now, I can get to Varanar and back within hours. No, Elyon, you're not strong enough yet. I am. I will be. He drew the blade out a few inches and let a gust of wind blow off it, stirring cloaks and canvas both. Some vitality returned to his cheeks. Varanar, Elenar, Ilyvar? If Drogar attacked the capital, he may have flown elsewhere as well. We need to know. He took a step closer. Father, Lilia. I know. Amron couldn't let personal concerns drive his course. Lilia had been in Ilyvar the last they knew, under the care of her grandfather, Lord Bryden. According to Elyon, Amara had left Varanar in a bid to bring her home. It was possible she had done so, that they were back in the city when it was attacked, or in Ilyvar, or on the road which carried great perils of its own. In such times he had to accept the possibility that his daughter was already dead. Accept it and not dwell on it, yet all the same. He looked his son in the eye. You know the importance of the blade you carry, Elyon. You know they may be our only chance. If you should encounter Drogar again, or another dragon, if you should fall and lose the blade. I won't. I'm rested, father. I'm ready. Several other men gave assenting nods, murmuring agreement. Sir Ralph of Rottingbridge offered counsel. Learning the true fate of Varanar is essential. It could be as you say, my lord, and the Dread was driven away. If so, there may be a chance to salvage and regather our strength behind whatever is left of its walls. And abandon the coast? Asked Sir Adam aghast. If we leave King's Point, the Agarathi will be able to land on our shores unhindered. If they return... They ran, thundered Sir Tagon Cargill. They saw the dragon and ran. They won't be coming back. They expected him no more than we did, Sir Adam retorted. They fled to their ships by instinct and terror, but when their commanders get a grip of them, they'll be back. They will swarm us, take this city, and continue upriver to finish the job the dragons have started. The Fire Father will make sure of it. They'll destroy us all. Chaos and calamity and the ending of the world, Amron thought. The Agarathi are slaves enthralled to elders' rule, said Luthien. We must work to break this change. Free them and work with them. Our very survival depends on it. Work? Work with them? Balked Sir Gerald Strand in a disbelieving huff. These men came here to kill us, and now what? We're to just kiss and make up? No. I say we hang them, open their necks, throw them in the Red Sea and make it redder. Tie them to the masts of whatever ships they left behind and sink them. Send every last one of those bastards down to Darl's domain. No, Luthien said at once. That is not how we treat prisoners of war here, Sir Gerald. Ignore him, Captain Luthien, Rodman Taynar said darkly, staring into Sir Gerald's piggish little eyes. We all know how Gerald treats his friends. It's no wonder he'd advocate such cruelty toward his enemies. The doughy knight fronted up to that, swinging his soft bulk in Rodman's direction. And just what do you mean by that? You know what I mean. It didn't take long for Sir Gerald to puzzle it out. King Ellis, is that it? One little mistake and I'm tarred forever? One mistake? You stood by and let your own king be thrown from a balcony. If I had it my way, you'd be thrown back into your cell, Strand. How many men died here 2 days ago? How many thousands of good, honest men? And you survived? At least Sir Alan did us the courtesy of dying, but you just had to live on. Nathaniel did too, Sir Gerald's flabby chins were wobbling. If you're to direct your odium somewhere, Sir Rodman, why not at him? Rodman looked over to where Sir Nathaniel Alarin stood, quietly observing. Because he knows his place. He knows not to speak unless he's got something useful to contribute. And he acquitted himself with honor during the battle. I saw. I was there. Nathaniel tried to save my uncle. But you? Where were you, Sir Gerald? When we all rushed out to meet the dread, when we fought the dragons across the field, where were you? Nowhere. You were nowhere. Hiding, most likely, curled up in some pit, bawling like a child and pissing yourself. He bared his teeth. Amron had never seen the young man like this before. My uncle, your own cousin, was awoken in his sickbed with a stab wound in his gut, and that didn't stop him donning his armor and marching out to fight at the head of his men. He fought hard, so hard his stitches ripped open and the wound in his gut tore even wider. He fought on even as he bled to death. He died a hero, Sir Gerald, and you live on, a worm. Rodman, Elian stepped over, resting a hand on his friend's shoulder. That'll do now. That's enough. Is it? You hate him as much as I do, Elian. We all hate him. His very presence here insults me. Sir Gerald's pockmarked cheeks had gone bright red. He made a harumphy sound, as though to try to maintain some dignity. I don't need to hear this. I'm the heir to House Strand, not some common serving man. Your great-aunt Marjorie was my mother, Rodman. We're family. You have no right to speak to me like this. I have every right. I'm your lord now. Lord of a dying house. A dying house? Rodman's fist gripped steel. Say that again. Sir Gerald drew back. I only mean, how many Taynar men died here? And how many in Varenar? Your grandfather is dead. Your uncle, after you... Enough, Amron boomed, lest this dissolve even further. We are all under threat of extinction. Every house in the north, great, middling, and small, every knightly house, new and renowned, every family, every man, woman, and child. That's the truth. When we come out on the other side of this, who knows what will be left. All we can do now is fight to retain what we have. Together, enough of this bickering. Silence followed his words, though the tension was thick enough to cut. This isn't the time for this, Amron realized. They needed rest, all of them. Nothing useful would be accomplished until they cleared their heads. We can resume on the morrow, he decided. Get some sleep, all of you. That's an order. Sir Adam make sure that our borders are well watched. As well as they can be, my lord. I have men at every breach and broken tower, and sentries on the intact sections of wall. We'll have warning if anyone comes. Amron nodded. Or anything. Until tomorrow, then. He made to step around the table. Elian moved in his way. We haven't finished, father. I don't want to go without your permission, but I will if I must. Amron let out a breath. There will be no fighting him on this one, and he's right. We need to know. Fine, if you're sure you're strong enough. I am. Then go. Rest at Crosswater if you feel you need to. See what you can learn and return at once. I want you back here as soon as possible, Elyon. Yes, my lord. Elyon gave a bow, turned, took a place, then stopped. King, he said, looking at the exit flaps. He let the word hang for a moment, then turned back again to address the council. My king, he met Amron's eyes. It's time we started saying it, Father. We've never needed one more, a king to unite us, inspire us. The men in the room shifted stance at once, sensing a moment of import. Backs straightening, chins rising, heads went up and down, nodding, eyes steeled. Lord Gavron Grave pushed up from his stone seat. Lord Wharton rose, suppressing a cough. King, said Lithian, tasting the title on his tongue. It's always suited you, Amron. About time we made it official. Sir Tagon dropped to a knee, God still cracking on stone. He pulled the great warhammer of House Cargill from his back and laid it down before him. King Descartes, he boomed, my hammer is yours. And my blade, said Sir Quinn, kneeling at Cargill's side, and at once the others went to follow Sir Nathaniel and Sir Gerald, Sir Ralph of Rottingbridge, Sir Taurus Stoutman, and Sir Storis Pentar, the Ironfoot and Lord Wharton, Lord Barrow, Lord Kendrick, and Lord Rodman Taynar, Roger Whitebeard, his faithful guard, and Walter Selleck, his faithful scribe, and Lithian, his closest friend, and Elyon, his last living son. Every one of them went to one knee. Amron watched them all go down, and accepted that it was time. I meant to share the rule with your uncle, Lord Taynar, he said to young Rodman. By rights, that honor should go to you now, if you want it. I never wanted it, your majesty. Not to be a lord, much less a king. Rodman glanced across at Elyon. Your son will tell you. I meant to follow, not to lead. This is your kingdom to rule. Yours as it should always have been, said Lithian, looking up at him. And from the booming lungs of Sir Tagon came the roar. Long live the king, King Amron Descartes, long live the king. Without prompting, he rose to his feet, threw open the flaps, and let his bellow ring out through the ruin of the city. Long live the king, long live the king. And with his great war hammer raised aloft, he marched in the smoggy night air, bellowing for all to hear. The others took up the chant, standing and going with him, drawing their misting blades, thrusting them to the skies. Elyon and Lithian moved to Amron's sides, taking his arms, leading him forth. They marched him out into the open square to the tents and pavilions, the captains and commanders, the banners whipping in the wind. Men emerged from inside and appeared from broken alleys. Upon the shattered walls the watchmen and bowmen looked down, and across the square, across the city, the chant began to echo and grow. Long live the king, long live the king, long live the king.